Who the hell are you talking to? The question was a low growl, ripped from a throat tight with the day's frustrations. Julian Croft, a man whose tailored suit cost more than the rent for any apartment in a 5-mile radius, stood under the aging oaks of Willow Creek Park, his billion-dollar merger call still ringing in his ears. He'd come here to escape the city's noise, not to find more of its madness. And there, sitting alone on a faded quilt spread over the grass, was a tiny girl, chattering away to an audience of absolutely no one. Before we dive in, I have to ask you something. Have you ever felt completely invisible? Like you were screaming into a void? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 7, looked up. Her eyes weren't wild or lost. They were the deep, calm brown of ancient riverbeds. She blinked, a slow, deliberate motion, and then offered a smile that felt less like a child's and more like a diplomat's. "They're already here," she said, her voice clear as a bell. She gestured to the empty spaces around her on the quilt. Julian's eyes followed her hand. He saw nothing. Just 4 pristine plastic plates, arranged in a perfect square. No food, no forks, no cups, but the certainty in her tone, the sheer gravity of the gesture. This wasn't a game. This was a ceremony. He felt the armor of his annoyance crack. He loosened his tie and took a step closer, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the soft earth. "My mistake," he said, his voice softening. "May I ask who they are?" The girl carefully adjusted a plate to her left. "That one's Mama's. This one's for Mr. Henderson, my turtle. He doesn't eat much, so he gets the small corner." She pointed to the spot opposite her. "And that's Uncle David's. He laughs real loud, even when nothing's funny." Julian crouched, the fabric of his trousers protesting. "What about this spot?" he asked, pointing to the plate directly next to her. "That's mine," she said, scooting over an inch. "But you can sit where Mr. Henderson was. He's already had his fill." Julian felt a genuine smile break across his face, a rare event that felt foreign on his own skin. "I wouldn't want to impose on Mr. Henderson." "It's okay," she said, patting the worn fabric of the quilt. "His turn is over." The invitation was so sincere, so utterly devoid of pretense, that Julian found himself lowering his 6'2" frame onto the ground, feeling impossibly large and out of place. "I'm Maya," she said, extending a small, serious hand. "I'm 7.5. "That's very precise," he chuckled, shaking it. "I'm growing," she stated, as if explaining a fundamental law of physics. "Mama says my thoughts are getting too big for my head. A pleasure to meet you, Maya. I'm Julian." "Hi, Mr. Julian." A cool autumn breeze danced through the park, lifting the edges of the quilt and whispering through the leaves overhead. For the first time all day, Julian felt the knot in his shoulders begin to unwind. He glanced again at the empty, gleaming plates. "So," he said, playing along. "What's on the menu?" Maya straightened her posture, taking on the role of hostess with solemn importance. "Barbecue ribs, potato salad, cornbread with honey butter, and sweet tea. The best." "That sounds incredible." "It's our favorite," she said. Then her voice dropped, becoming a protective whisper. "Well, it was. Mama doesn't eat much anymore." Julian's gaze shifted to the plate she'd designated as her mother's. The way her voice changed when she spoke of her. It wasn't sadness. It was the fierce, gentle tone of a guardian. "She couldn't make it today?" he asked softly. "No, sir, she's tired. Deep down tired." Maya picked up a twig and began stirring the invisible potato salad on her own plate. "So I bring the picnic to her, pretend style." Julian watched her, truly watched her, and saw something beyond a child's fantasy. This wasn't play. It was a lifeline. It was a daughter keeping a universe intact for a mother who was fading from it. "Do you and your mom come here often?" Maya nodded. "On her good days. We used to come every Sunday. She loves these trees. Says they remind her of North Carolina, where she grew up." "She's from the South?" "Yep. She tells me stories about fireflies and screen porches. I don't know what a screen porch is." "You'll find out someday," he said. She smiled at him, a real one this time. "You talk nice for a grown-up." "Thank you. You talk nice for someone who's almost 8. A giggle escaped her. "Mama says I have an old soul, but I only talk a lot when I'm nervous." "Are you nervous right now?" "No, sir, I like you. You have kind eyes, even when your face is grumpy." He flinched slightly. She was right. "You remind me of that man on the news," she continued, "the one who built that new hospital wing for kids." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You mean the new pediatric unit at Ethelberg General?" "Yeah, that was you." "It might have been," he said, a wave of discomfort washing over him. Maya's eyes widened with awe. "Mama said you were the good kind of rich." The words hit him like a physical blow. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but something inside him recoiled. "What?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Make someone the good kind?" Maya shrugged, a simple gesture that carried the weight of profound truth. "They help without making a lot of noise about it." Julian had to look away, toward the hazy line where the city's steel towers met the sky. It was the kind of truth a child could deliver like a feather, and a man like him would feel like a stone. After a few minutes of quiet, she pulled a folded, crinkled napkin from her pocket and carefully unfolded it. It had a short message written in bright blue crayon. He watched as she gently slid it under the empty plate in front of her. "What's that?" he asked. "My report for Mama," she said, her focus entirely on her task. "I write one every time. Then when I get home, I read it to her so she knows everything we did." Julian leaned in, feeling like he was intruding on something sacred. "Can I ask what it says?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. It says, "Dear Mama, the sun was warm, but the wind was chilly. A grumpy man named Mr. Julian came to our picnic, but his eyes were nice. I saved you the last rib, even though Uncle David wanted it. Love, Maya." What would you do if you were him? Hearing those words, seeing that pure, heartbreaking love in action? Would you just walk away, back to your world of mergers and skyscrapers? Or would you feel that pull, that undeniable call to do something? Let me know your thoughts. It's moments like these that truly show us who we are. Julian swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. That's a beautiful report. She likes when I describe the smells, too, Maya added brightly. I'll tell her it smelled like autumn leaves and barbecue sauce. Those are two of the best smells, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Yep. She began to pack up, folding the quilt with a practiced efficiency. The ceremony was over. Are you walking home by yourself? He asked, a knot of concern tightening in his stomach. She nodded. We live on Elm Street, just a couple blocks that way. I know all the stop signs. He stood, brushing the grass from his trousers. Would you mind if I walked you to the edge of the park? She considered this for a moment. Only if you promise not to tell Mama. She says I have to be brave. He placed a hand over his heart. My lips are sealed. They walked in comfortable silence to the sidewalk. At the edge of the grass, Maya turned and gave him a tiny wave. Thanks for coming to the picnic, Mr. Julian. You can come next time if you want. I'd like that very much, Maya. She smiled, then skipped off down the street, the plastic plates rattling softly in her tote bag, the beads in her hair clicking like tiny wind chimes. Julian stood there, motionless, until she disappeared around a corner. It was only when he looked down that he noticed the forgotten napkin. The breeze had nudged it out from under the plate. He bent down, picked up the small, crumpled piece of paper, and read her words one more time. A grumpy man named Mr. Julian came to our picnic, but his eyes were nice. He carefully folded the note, placed it in the inner pocket of his blazer, and walked back through the park. 4 empty plates, 1 forgotten napkin, but the weight in his chest, the feeling that had settled deep in his bones, that was terrifyingly real. Julian Croft couldn't shake the girl from his mind. Even as his driver navigated the sleek black sedan through the congested heart of the city, the world outside muted behind tinted glass, his thoughts remained in Willow Creek Park. They were fixed on a worn quilt, 4 plastic plates, and a small folded napkin that now felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric of his expensive blazer. He had already canceled 2 meetings and a conference call. His assistant, Marcus, had left a string of increasingly frantic voicemails. There was a quarterly earnings report to approve, a new biotech venture to assess, an interview with the Wall Street Journal, but all of it had been rendered meaningless because a 7-year-old girl named Maya had offered him a seat at her table. He pulled the napkin from his pocket again, his thumb tracing the waxy indentations of her crayon. His eyes were nice. Those 4 words echoed in the hollow spaces inside him. When the car pulled up to the gleaming glass entrance of his penthouse, Julian didn't go in. Instead, he gave his driver the night off and started to walk, something he hadn't done in years without a destination or a security detail. He found Elm Street easily, just 2 blocks from the park, exactly as she'd said. He scanned the block, not sure what he was looking for. A bicycle with streamers, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a door propped open with the sound of laughter spilling out. What he found was much quieter. An old brick apartment building, the kind that had been handsome in the 1950s, but now wore its age like a shroud of fatigue. Cracked steps, peeling paint on the window frames, and a single, faded name next to one of the buzzers. Evans. That must be her mother. Sarah. He didn't press the button. He just stood across the street, watching, feeling like an intruder. A part of him felt ridiculous. This wasn't his world. He had no right to be here. But another part, the part that vividly remembered being 13 and sleeping in the back of a rusted-out station wagon, told him to stay. Just 1 more minute. A kid on a skateboard zipped past, the clatter of the wheels startling him. Julian sighed, adjusted his blazer, and turned to leave. But as he stepped into the street, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You lost, mister?" He turned. An older woman with hair the color of steel wool stood on the building's stoop, her arms crossed over a thick cardigan, her eyes missing nothing behind a pair of formidable glasses. Her name tag read, "Mrs. Gable, Supervisor." "Not exactly," he said. "I met a little girl in the park today. Maya. She mentioned she lived around here." Mrs. Gable's stern expression softened by a fraction. "Maya Evans. That child has the soul of a 90-year-old philosopher, and the mouth to go with it." "That's the one." "You a relative?" "No," Julian replied. "Just someone she invited to a picnic." A dry, crackling laugh escaped Mrs. Gable. "She got you too, huh? That girl could sell ice to a polar bear." He smiled. "I suppose she could. Are they home?" "Not right now," she said, her tone shifting. "Sarah, her mom, had a bad spell last night. The fibromyalgia gets wicked when the weather turns. An ambulance had to come for her this morning. Maya went with her." A cold fist clenched in Julian's gut. Are they okay? Sarah's stable, last I heard. But the hospital doesn't let kids hang around for long. Child Services probably has her for the afternoon until Sarah gets discharged. He nodded, the words catching in his throat. You one of those church people? Mrs. Gable asked abruptly. He blinked. Not in a long time. She always says a prayer over those plates, you know, the old woman continued, her voice cracking just slightly. Even when they're empty. Says, God can fill what the world forgets. Julian looked down at his polished shoes, feeling a familiar sting of shame, mixed with something that felt dangerously like hope. Thank you, he said, offering a small nod. She's got a birthday coming up, Mrs. Gable added as he turned to leave. Turns 8 next month. Sarah's been collecting cans for weeks, trying to scrape enough together for a small cake. Julian stood there for a moment longer, the gears in his mind, long dormant in this particular way, beginning to grind and turn. When he returned to his penthouse, he didn't head for the bar or the sprawling view from his balcony. He walked directly into his home office, opened the bottom drawer of a massive mahogany desk, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. His mother's. She had kept it through every eviction, every move, every year of barely scraping by. Inside, in her elegant, looping script, were prayers, recipes for meals made from almost nothing, and phrases that had been his only inheritance. On the very last page, she had written, "If you ever forget where you came from, Julian, don't you dare come looking for me." He hadn't opened that journal in 15 years. That night, sleep was a forgotten country. Instead, he made calls. Quiet calls. To friends who ran foundations, to his personal wealth management team, to lawyers who specialized in compassionate cases. He asked about Sarah Evans. What kind of experimental treatments were available for her condition? What housing programs could be fast-tracked? What school district was Maya in, and did it have the resources she deserved? He wanted to know everything, and he told them to make sure his name was attached to none of it. The next morning, Julian returned to Willow Creek Park. This time, he carried a heavy wicker basket. Inside was real food, barbecue ribs from the best smokehouse in the city, creamy potato salad, fresh cornbread, sweet tea, and an entire peach cobbler. Enough for 4 people, and then some. He spread out a new, clean quilt in the exact same spot under the oak trees. Then he waited. The wind rustled, a dog barked, children's laughter drifted over the hill. And then he saw them. Maya, her hair in fresh braids, wearing a faded but clean blue dress. And beside her, walking slowly and leaning heavily on a cane, was a woman. Sarah. She was pale and looked exhausted, but her back was straight, her chin held high with a pride that was both fierce and fragile. Maya stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes as wide as dinner plates. "Mr. Julian?" He stood. "You said I could come next time." Maya blinked, then let out a whoop and ran towards him. "You brought real cobbler." Sarah reached them a moment later, her voice soft but wary, laced with steel. "Sir, I don't know what this is." Julian offered his hand. "Ma'am, I know this is forward, but your daughter extended an invitation. And where I come from, when someone invites you to their table, the least you can do is bring dessert." Sarah studied him, her sharp gaze taking in the expensive watch, the casual but clearly designer clothes, and the genuine warmth in his eyes. She looked at her daughter, who was already sitting on the quilt, pointing out where Mr. Henderson the turtle would sit. She let out a long, slow breath, and then carefully lowered herself onto the grass. "I don't take charity," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not charity," Julian replied, sitting across from her. "It's a picnic." Sarah let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "You're lucky she likes you." "I'm lucky she saw me," he said, so quietly he wasn't sure if he'd said it aloud. They sat together, the three of them, and for a little while, under the autumn sun, nothing was broken. They ate, they talked, they laughed. At the end of the meal, Maya looked at her mom, her face smeared with peach juice, and said, "Today's picnic was even better than the pretend one." Julian smiled at the little girl, her plate finally, blessedly full. "Next time," she whispered to him, her eyes sparkling with a new idea, "we should invite more people." And Julian Croft, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks and ruthless efficiency, simply nodded, not yet realizing that he had just agreed to build a whole new world. 3 weeks passed, and in the quiet, unseen corners of their lives, everything began to shift. On the surface, the chipped bricks of the Elm Street apartment building looked the same. The hallway floors still groaned underfoot, and Sarah Evans still woke each morning to the familiar chorus of aching joints. But inside apartment 2B, hope was starting to take up residence. Thanks to Julian's anonymous interventions, a specialist from a private clinic now made house calls, adjusting Sarah's medication and providing physical therapy. The back rent had been paid off by a charitable fund with a generic, untraceable name, and Maya, though she didn't know the mechanics behind it, could feel the change in the air. Her mother was smiling more. She was sleeping through the night. That, in itself, was a miracle that made the whole world feel brighter. Julian, in his own world of glass towers and silent elevators, found himself looking forward to Saturdays with an eagerness he hadn't felt since he was a boy. Every weekend, he returned to Willow Creek Park with a real picnic. The menu never changed. Ribs, potato salad, cobbler, but the guest list grew. Maya insisted on it. She decreed that every picnic needed new faces. First, Mrs. Gable came, armed with a pitcher of tart lemonade and a barrage of unfiltered opinions. Then, a young, overwhelmed teacher from Maya's school joined them, after hearing whispers about the little girl with the imaginary feasts. A quiet, lonely man who ran the corner bodega came one week, bringing a bag of perfectly ripe peaches. By the 5th Saturday, a small, unlikely community had woven itself together on that quilt, drawn not by charity, but by something far more precious, a sense of belonging. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Julian stayed late to help clean up. Maya tugged on the sleeve of his cashmere sweater. "Mr. Julian," she whispered, as if imparting a state secret. "Yes, Lady Maya," he replied, playing along with the grand titles she'd bestowed upon them. "Do you see them too?" He looked around. The park was nearly empty now, save for Mrs. Gable dozing on a bench and a few teenagers playing frisbee in the distance. "See who?" She pointed to the quilt, to the empty plates she still insisted on setting out. One for her father, a man she'd only seen in a single faded photograph. One for her great-grandmother, who she said had taught her mother how to sing. And one she never named, but simply called the one who got lost. Julian followed her gaze, then looked back at her small, serious face. "No," he said honestly, "but I can feel them." Maya beamed. "Me too." That night, Julian sat in his penthouse, the city lights glittering below him like a fallen constellation. In front of him was a blank sheet of paper. At the top, in his precise architectural handwriting, he wrote 2 words: "The Unseen Guest Initiative." He didn't know yet what it would be, but the idea had taken root in his soul. It would be a program to fund community meals. Yes, but it would be more than that. It would be about restoring dignity. It would be about empowering people to be hosts, not just recipients, because Maya had taught him that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves a seat at the table, especially the ones no one else can see. The following Monday, he returned to the Elm Street apartment building with something other than a picnic basket. He came with a question. When Sarah opened the door, her face lit up with a cautious warmth. "No ribs today, Mr. Croft?" she teased. "Not today," he said. "I came with a proposal." He stepped inside and laid a folder on their small, wobbly kitchen table. "A community event," he explained. "Not a fundraiser, a celebration, for Maya's 8th birthday." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And what are you planning? Renting out the stadium?" He laughed. "Just the community center down the street. We'll keep it simple, personal. But I want you and Maya to be in charge of the planning, with my resources, but with your heart." Sarah looked at the papers, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. "You want me to run this?" "I want you to host it," he corrected gently. "The same way Maya hosts her picnics, with grace, and with a table big enough for everyone, real or imagined." Sarah swallowed hard, emotion clouding her eyes. "It's been a long time since anyone trusted me with something important." Julian leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "Then it's long overdue." 2 weeks later, brightly colored flyers appeared all over the neighborhood. "Everyone has a seat. A community celebration hosted by Sarah and Maya Evans. No ticket price, no dress code. Just food, music, stories, and plenty of room for unseen guests." The night before the party, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, her legs kicking with excitement under the thin blanket. "Mama," she whispered into the dark, "what if no one comes?" Sarah, lying beside her, stroked her daughter's hair. "Sweetheart, even if it's just you and me and Mr. Julian, we'll still have each other. And that's a party all by itself." Maya nodded, then asked, "Can Mr. Julian sit next to you tomorrow?" Sarah smiled into the darkness. "He can sit wherever he wants. He's earned it." Across the city, Julian wasn't sleeping either. He stood in his cavernous walk-in closet, surrounded by rows of identical expensive suits, feeling a nervous flutter he hadn't experienced since his very first business pitch. But this wasn't about profits or projections. This was about people, real people, the kind who would see him not as a billionaire CEO, but as the man who was lucky enough to be invited to a little girl's picnic. The celebration was set to begin at noon, and for the first time in a very long time, Julian Croft felt like he was preparing for something that truly mattered. By 11:30 a.m., the community center on 8th Street was already humming with life. The air was thick with the rich, soulful smells of slow-cooked collard greens, sweet cornbread, and the unmistakable aroma of peach cobbler. Mismatched chairs were arranged in long rows under strings of paper butterflies that Maya and a team of neighborhood kids had painstakingly crafted. A classic Motown playlist whispered from a small speaker in the corner, filling the room with a gentle, joyful rhythm. Sarah stood near the entrance, a quiet radiance about her. Her chronic pain was still a low hum beneath the surface, but today it was overshadowed by a spark in her eye, a light that had been dimmed for years by worry and fatigue. She watched her daughter, a blur of yellow dress and bright white ribbons, twirling near the center of the room. Maya was in her element, a pint-sized queen overseeing her kingdom, unaware that the 100 or so people who had gathered were there not just for cake, but for her. They were there for the spirit of a little girl who had reminded them how to make space for one another. At precisely noon, Julian walked through the doors. He came alone, carrying a single foil-wrapped dish. Maya spotted him instantly. "Sir Julian!" she yelled, launching herself across the room into his arms. He knelt, laughing as she squeezed his neck. "Happy birthday, Your Majesty," he whispered. She pulled back, her eyes fixed on the dish. "What's that?" "Peach cobbler," he said. "I made it myself. Well, I supervised while my chef made it, but I did the official taste test. She grinned. Then you get to sit at the head table. He followed her through the bustling room, greeted by warm nods and handshakes from people who now knew him not as a figure from the financial pages, but as Maya's friend. At the center of the room was a long table draped in a floral cloth. Places were set for Maya, Sarah, Mrs. Gable, a few of Maya's school friends, and one empty seat, deliberately placed and left unadorned. "That's for Great-Grandma," Maya whispered to him. "She always said birthdays are for remembering, not just for presents." Julian felt a familiar lump form in his throat. Then it's perfect. As people began to fill their plates, Sarah stepped forward and tapped a glass with a spoon. The room fell into a respectful hush. "Before we eat," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I just want to say thank you. Not just for coming today, but for seeing us. For seeing my daughter not as a girl who has less, but as a girl who has more than enough heart to share." A wave of warm applause filled the room. Julian watched her, filled with a quiet admiration. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. "Today is about community," Sarah continued. "It's about pulling up a chair, whether you got a formal invitation or just smelled the cobbler from down the street. Maya believes there's always one more seat at the table, so we set out a few extra around the room." She gestured to a handful of empty folding chairs scattered along the walls. They didn't look lonely. They looked hopeful, saved for those who couldn't be there, or for those who hadn't yet found the courage to walk through the door. The party unfolded in a symphony of shared joy. Laughter mingled with the clinking of plates. Children chased each other under tables while their grandparents swapped stories over slices of cornbread. It wasn't a polished, catered affair. It was something infinitely better. It was real. Julian sat beside Maya, who was happily devouring a piece of chicken. She looked up at him with serious eyes. "Do rich people have parties like this?" "Sometimes," he said, "but do they have unseen guests?" He smiled. "I highly doubt it." She leaned in conspiratorially. "That's why ours are more fun." Julian chuckled. "You might be onto something." Halfway through the meal, a young boy, maybe Maya's age, shyly approached the head table. His clothes were clean but worn, his shoes held together with strips of black tape. He was clutching a folded napkin. "Is it okay if I put this at the empty chair?" he asked softly. Maya stood up, her expression solemn and understanding. "Of course, she'll like that." The boy walked to the empty seat, carefully placed the napkin on the plate, and then backed away, as if he had just touched something holy. Julian leaned towards Sarah. "Did you see that?" She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "I saw it. She started something, Julian. She reminded people of what it means to belong." The celebration continued for hours. A man with a harmonica started a soulful rendition of "Lean on Me," and soon the entire room was singing along, a chorus of strangers united in harmony. Near the end, Maya stood on her chair, her small voice silencing the room. "Thank you for coming to my party," she said, "and thank you to my mama who shows me that being sick doesn't mean you're not strong, and to Mr. Julian who brings real peach cobbler, even though pretend ones are good too." The crowd laughed gently. "But mostly," she continued, her voice ringing with clarity, "I want to thank the people we can't see, like Great-Grandma or my daddy who I bet is watching from a star, or all the people who feel lost and have no one to talk to. We see you, and you can always sit with us." No one moved. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous, sustained, and deeply felt. Julian stood last, not out of hesitation, but because he wanted to savor the moment, to burn it into his memory. That night, after the last guest had departed and the final chair had been folded, Sarah and Maya walked Julian to his car. "You did a good thing today," Sarah said softly. "And not just for us." Julian shook his head. "She did it," he said, nodding toward Maya, who was leaning sleepily against her mother. "She's set the table. I just brought a side dish." Maya yawned. "Next time," she mumbled, "we're gonna need a bigger room." Julian smiled down at her. "We'll build one." As he drove away, the napkin from their very first picnic still folded in his coat pocket, he glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw a little girl in a yellow dress, standing on a quiet street corner, waving goodbye to no one and everyone, all at once. And for a fleeting, magical moment, it looked as though all the empty seats in the world were finally full. And now, a quick pause. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe in the power of a simple, open chair, then please take a second to like this video and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story we bring to life. By the end of the week, the story of the birthday party had taken on a life of its own. It spread not through slick media campaigns, but through whispers in grocery store aisles and conversations over backyard fences. A local news channel ran a short, heartfelt piece on the girl who set a table for the whole city. It went semi-viral. Calls started flooding Julian's office. People wanted to know how they could donate to Maya's project. They wanted to start their own community tables. Julian handled it with quiet efficiency. He funneled all inquiries through a newly formed, discreet foundation he called the Open Table Project. Its mission was simple: to provide resources for communities to host their own gatherings, with only 2 rules. 1. A seat must always be left empty for an unseen guest. 2. Everyone is welcome, no questions asked. But not everyone celebrated this new wave of community spirit. A few days later, while Julian was in a board meeting, he received an urgent call from Marcus. "You need to see this," his assistant said, his voice tense. He emailed Julian a link to a news article. Richard Sterling, a ruthless real estate developer known for buying up entire blocks and replacing them with luxury high-rises, had just announced a massive new development project. Its name was the Willow Creek Renaissance. It was slated to be built directly on the land that housed Willow Creek Park and the surrounding low-income apartment buildings, including the one on Elm Street. The article was filled with slick renderings of glass towers and rooftop infinity pools. Sterling was quoted as saying he was revitalizing a forgotten corner of the city. Julian felt a cold fury rise in his chest. He knew exactly what revitalizing meant. It meant evicting families like Sarah and Maya's. It meant erasing a community and replacing it with a playground for the rich. That evening, he visited Sarah. He found her sitting at her kitchen table, a crisp, official-looking letter in her hands. An eviction notice. It gave them 60 days. "He's not just coming for the park," she said, her voice hollow. "He's coming for our home." "This isn't just about real estate, Sarah," Julian said, his jaw tight. "This is about what we've built. It threatens him. Community threatens men like Sterling because it's something they can't buy or control." The threats became more personal. Anonymous calls were made to Child Protective Services, questioning Sarah's fitness as a mother due to her illness. An inspector from the city's building department showed up, citing their apartment for a dozen minor, previously ignored violations. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to wear them down, to make them feel powerless. The final straw came one evening when Carla found a sealed envelope slid under her door. Inside, there was no note, just a single photograph of Maya playing in the park, a stark red circle drawn around her small, smiling face. Carla's hands trembled as she called Julian. "He's watching her," she whispered, her voice cracking with a mother's primal fear. "I'm on my way," he said, his own voice dangerously calm. He was already reaching for his coat. This was no longer a project. It was a promise. A promise to protect the little girl who had reminded him what it meant to be human. "Sterling may have money and power," he said, more to himself than to her. "But we have the table, and we're about to make it a hell of a lot louder." The next morning, the city woke up to a different kind of story. Julian, leveraging every ounce of his media influence, had arranged an exclusive interview for Sarah with a renowned, respected journalist from the New York Times. The piece wasn't about eviction or developers. The headline read, "A Mother's Table. How one woman and her daughter are redefining community in a city that forgot how." The article was poignant, powerful, and devoid of sentimentality. It told the story of the Open Table Project, of the unseen guests, of the quiet dignity of a community refusing to be erased. It never mentioned Sterling by name, which made its message all the more devastating. It painted him not as a villain, but as something worse: irrelevant. Public opinion shifted like a tidal wave. City council members, who had been quietly backing Sterling's project, suddenly started making statements about protecting vulnerable communities. The mayor's office announced a formal review of the development plan. The Open Table Project became a symbol of resistance, a quiet, powerful testament to the fact that a home is more than just a building. The climax came not in a boardroom, but in the quiet, dusty auditorium of the old city library, where the Chair Project was holding its first public symposium. Sarah stood on the stage, not as a victim, but as a leader. She spoke of hope served on a paper plate. She spoke of the courage it takes to save a seat for someone you can't see. And in the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows, sat Richard Sterling. He didn't clap. He just watched, his face an unreadable mask. Later, as Sarah was leaving, she found him standing alone in a deserted hallway. "You came," she said simply. "I thought I should see the machine I was up against," he replied, his voice laced with a bitterness that couldn't quite mask a flicker of something else. "This isn't a machine," Sarah said, her voice steady. "It's a mirror. It just shows you what you bring to it." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin, one of Maya's. She handed it to him. "You don't have to sit at our table," she said, "but you no longer get to pretend it doesn't exist." He took the napkin. Then she walked away. He unfolded it. Inside, in a child's careful, looping script, were 7 words. "Your seat is still here, if ready." A week later, Sterling publicly withdrew his proposal for the Willow Creek Renaissance Project. He cited unforeseen community feedback. 2 weeks after that, an anonymous donation of $5 million was made to the Open Table Project, with a directive to use it to purchase and renovate the Elm Street apartment building, turning it into a permanent, community-owned cooperative. The movement grew, spreading from city to city, a quiet revolution of kindness. Chapters opened in prisons, in schools, in corporate break rooms. The core idea remained unchanged. Leave a seat open. Remember the unseen. One cool spring evening, Julian and Sarah stood on the rooftop of the newly renovated Elm Street building. It had been transformed into a garden, with benches, planters, and a permanent, beautifully crafted wooden table at its center. Chairs of every shape and size, donated by people from all over the city, surrounded it. Down below, the city hummed with life. Maya, now a confident 8-year-old, was showing a new boy how to plant marigolds. "Do you think he'll ever show up?" Sarah asked, her gaze drifting toward the skyline where Sterling's office building stood. "Who?" Julian asked, though he knew. "The guest we're all waiting for." I don't know, Julian said honestly. But his seat will be here. We'll save it for him. And so the chairs wait. What a powerful, incredible story. It just goes to show you that the biggest, most meaningful changes in the world can start from the simplest, most human act of all: seeing someone. Truly seeing them. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to feel seen today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make you believe in the quiet, unbreakable goodness of this world. Until next time, keep a seat open.